that the truth is, conscious awareness is all there is. That's what non-duality means. Not two means there's no subject and object. That's an illusion. Awareness, the experience that we're having, the natural state of awareness, is everything. When you come to an understanding of the truth, you come to an understanding that there's no doer, that there is no self. These are the essence of the teachings, that there is no self. And if there is no self, what's left? If there is no self, what's left is what's happening. And part of what's happening is the idea that we entertain that there's a self. But that's just what's happening. That's not actual. Okay? So the reality of it is that non-duality is the truth. If there is no self, if there is no, and what I mean by there is no self is that there is no personality. The awareness that is here is not a self. The awareness that is here is impersonal. It's just aware. I mean, if you look at the awareness, it's very, very important at some point in this process to see if you can notice the awareness and actually look at it and see that what I'm pointing to is evident there. What I'm pointing to is that there is no self. The awareness that is there is not a man or a woman. It's not personal. Right? It's just, all we can say is it is. It's this. It is. And even that is a conceptual understanding. The actual truth of it experientially is non-conceptual. So there's an experience occurring, and the conditioning that we've all undergone has had us believe in the idea that there's an identity here, there's a person here, there's a name here, there's a body here, there's a story here. This is the conditioning that we've all experienced, and it's not wrong. It's a necessary aspect of reality in terms of you can't have a human life without the conditioning. An unconditioned human life is an impossibility. An unconditioned human life is an impossibility because the conditioning is what has us begin to buy into the belief that we are a separate self. And that belief is such a core belief. That belief is something that you have a billion people enacting all the time. So it's got a big display of it. There's a big agreement about it being true. And yet, the evidence for it does not exist. This is why so many teachers, when they're talking about the subject, say, okay, you believe that you exist as a separate self. You believe that you're a personality. You believe there is a personal you there, and that personal you resides within that physical body. That's a belief. Can you produce evidence for it? Can you show me any evidence for that being the case? The answer is no. There is no evidence for it. There's no evidence for it because it's not the case. It doesn't exist. It's not real. This is dramatic, this is radical, and this is why in the practice of meditation, it's very important to actively practice the truth, actively practice developing your ability to see things as they are. In other words, practicing seeing things the way they are means seeing things without a self, seeing things happening as they're happening. The teachings are very helpful because the deeper we develop understandings about this, the easier it becomes to actually see it, to actually start to witness it. But these core beliefs are so fundamental that it takes practice, it takes continually calming the mind and relaxing the body to come out of this dream. And the belief is so strong, it reminds me of the way they catch monkeys. The way they catch monkeys is they have a coconut and they drill a hole in one end of the coconut, they hollow out the coconut, they attach a rope to one side of the coconut, And then they drill a hole in the other side of the coconut, just big enough for the monkey to get their hand inside. And then they put sweet fruit in the coconut and set the coconut down, attached to the rope, attached to a tree, and just leave. And then they come back later in the day and pick up the monkey. Because the monkeys will come and they'll put their hands in the hole in the coconut to get the sweet fruit and close their hands, and they can't get their hand out and they won't open their hand. So people just come and pick up the monkeys. That's the kind of belief human beings have in the idea that you're a personality in a physical body. And in spite of the fact that the evidence is clear that that's not true, and you're invited to pursue it. This is not a dogmatic belief system or a religion. This is as scientific as you can get. That's why there's such harmony now between the brain science and the traditions, the Eastern traditions and the practices, because they're dealing with the same reality. They're dealing with what's actually real, what's actually happening. And so just like the monkey that won't let go to get their freedom back, human beings won't let go to get their freedom back either. They'll hold on to what they believe to be true, no matter what the cost is, no matter how much suffering is involved, no matter how little freedom they have. But they're worse than the monkey, because the human being will come up with explanations, excuses, justifications, understandings, more elaborate belief systems and all that jazz to explain why we're not letting go of this core belief and we continue to suffer. So one of the things that's important in these teachings and practices is to allow the experience to be there, make contact with the suffering. Because the suffering exists because of the attachment to what's not true. That's the reason for the suffering, because attachment to what's not true has you act as if you are a separate human being from everybody else, which means you're going to be you're going to have defenses, and you're going to be aggressive, and you're going to be in fight or flight a lot of the time, because the odds are against you. You have 8 billion people. You have an entire world of phenomena happening that's unpredictable. So it's inevitable that you're going to be in that fight or flight mode all the time. Your nervous system is going to be in a state of activation at all times. That's why human beings don't get much core sleep. Human beings don't get much deep sleep, because the system is always activated. Even when you're sleeping most of the time, you're living in an internal world called dreaming. And in that world, you're operating the same way. You get upset in your dreams, you fight, you run. So this is the condition. And it's important to allow yourself to be aware of the condition. And the fact that we're doing these practices is a process in and of itself in which you have to be persistent and diligent. You have to have a strong conviction about the truth, so that you can, stay awake, so that you can keep seeing what's going on, especially when you get triggered, especially when and by the way, this is something I should say every single class without fail. We have nothing to say about the thoughts and the emotions that occur in our awareness. We have nothing to say. It's a machine running. It's a program running. And the reason that that's very important for you to keep getting clear about is because when we go off the rails and act like jerks and do damage, right, then we make it worse by feeling guilty about it and have remorse about it. So we torture ourselves going and coming. And the truth is, there's nothing to feel guilty about. There is nothing to have remorse about. You never did anything. The machine did it. And you're not the machine. The mind's generating these crazy thought patterns. And that when it generates crazy thought patterns, it brings up with it emotions, sometimes strong emotions. And it's unrealistic to think that you can maintain equanimity at all times, given that that's the case. That's unrealistic. That's why we talk about practice. And a very important part of the practice is to be able to deal with the fact that you will go off the rails. You will lose it and go stupid. And when you lose it and go stupid, that's going to be a continual process. It's going to be a pattern unless after when you lose it and go stupid, you've been able to watch that happen instead of identify with it. And after it happens, you don't go through a process of feeling bad about it because of what you did. You didn't do anything. That doesn't mean you're not responsible. That's the double-edged sword, you know. The truth is that you can't do anything wrong because you're not your mind. Your mind is the source of all the wrongdoing. And so there's no reason to be guilty or be remorseful. But when that comes up and plays, you have to let that run and be a witness to that too, just not identify with it. And if you practice this way, and if you're able to have space for what's happening over time, it will begin to die down and get calmer and quieter. And when that happens, there'll be more room for you to experience what's always available. The collective reality of personalities is still operating in the punishment modality, right? It's still operating in the retribution modality. If you look at some of these court cases when it comes time for sentencing and people come in the court to make a statement, and they talk about the person that's going to be sentenced, about how they wish they could kill them and how much they hate them and they're an animal and all that. This is the kind of visceral reactions that people have to what goes on. But you have to understand something. The person that's talking like that, right, doesn't realize that they're creating a world that they have to live in just like the person they're talking about. If that's true about that person, then that must be true about you too when you do things that are wrong. That's a sick reality. That's mental illness. That's the source of tremendous suffering. And the poor people, the people that end up in prison, you know, the truth be told, and I can speak about this because I've dealt with thousands of them over 32 years. They believe that they're a personality that did something wrong, just like most people do. And although, you know, they're put in a situation where they have to act in a way to kind of defend themselves, truth be told, they believe they are convicts. They believe they are convicted, and they believe they are evil, and they believe they've done wrong. They don't come out and admit that a lot of the time, but I've talked to these people after they were relaxed enough to drop that and acknowledge how much suffering they're experiencing because of how bad they are. And it takes some doing to talk them out of that and get them to realize that's simply not true. And it doesn't mean you're not responsible for what you do. That's the key. You know, we live in a world where we have to have rules, right, to protect ourselves from people who are violent and so forth. But it doesn't mean that those people that there's any benefit and workability to torturing those people and putting them under retribution and putting them in situations that are going to do nothing but create a monster. The prisons are monster factories. You know, you put people in prison, they get together with other people who believe that they're evil, and they don't feel that there's any way that they can survive in this society and have any peace or succeed in any way at all, other than being deviant, continue to be deviant. If you think I'm a criminal, okay, then I'll act like one, but I'll get better at it. Right? I might even run for president. There was never a time, and I worked in the system during that period, right? There was never a time where rehabilitation was really implemented. It was a show. That's when we called prisons correction institutions, but there was no correction going on. Right? So there was a show, and they put, for example, they put drug treatment programs into prisons, right? And then they told inmates, you have to participate in that program and if you don't, you won't get paroled, right? But if you look closer at the program, there was nothing going on in the program. It was an excuse for people who created drug treatment programs to make a lot of money by implementing them in prisons, and then they put them in prisons, and there was no real effective drug treatment going on. I was there witnessing it. And it's a reflection of the overall reality that we're living in which people see each other as potential threats. So the solution to the problem, right, the solution to the problem is that individual human beings have to begin to take responsibility for the condition we share with one another, and stop participating in the problem, stop being part of the problem and start taking responsibility for yourself and your own behavior, and not be willing to go along with the unworkability of it and the insanity of it all. All there is awareness. All there is consciousness, and it's non-dual. So that's what you have to grapple with. That's what you have to keep dealing with in terms of kind of contemplating it. This is a contemplative process, where you're contemplating these truths. And it's unrealistic to expect that you're going to get it overnight. You've got to be patient with this. It's a gradual process. If you stay with it and you keep calming the mind and relaxing the body, and you keep studying these understandings, a little bit at the time, the light will shine on more and more of it. You'll start to see more and more of it. That's the thing. If you stay with these practices, you've got to, in the beginning, you've got to bring some humility to this. You've got to bring some humility to this, and don't turn it into a parlor game. Don't turn it into a yes but situation. This is not an academic reality. We're talking about the truth here. Yes, it may be the case that you don't get it yet, you don't see it yet, right? And that may take some time because you've been completely indoctrinated to be a monkey with your hand in the coconut. So you've got to be patient about that, and through these practices over time, you'll start seeing things as they are, and at a certain point, if you stay the course, you will see what I'm pointing to. You'll see the whole thing. You'll see that there is no such thing as free will. You'll see everything's predetermined. You'll see there is no doer. You'll see that awareness is all there is. And along with seeing all those things comes the experiential freedom to be. The freedom to exist as what you are and see things as they are. It's a freedom. It's very freeing to experience the truth. Very freeing to be the awareness that you are, to experience the natural state. So from this natural state and from this awareness, you can look at the mental process, you can look at the emotions, you can look at the physical sensations, you can look at the behavior that appears to be a separate self operating in a world of other separate selves. But once you start to recognize and start to see in real time that that's not the case, things start to go different. Things start to get easier. Life starts to be more fulfilling. You start to be able to experience well-being. That's the key here. The key here is to get from suffering to well-being. Well-being is always available, but not when you're preoccupied with suffering. Well-being is always available, but not when you're a monkey holding the sweet fruit inside the coconut and you won't let go. That's that's one of the teachers that was, when I took one of the Vipassana training courses, the teacher in that course, Goenka, said, you've got to work out your own freedom. You've got to come out of your misery. Nobody can do that for you. You've got to have the audacity to be honest about what's going on in your life, and be honest about what's going on in your mind and what's going on in your body, and realize that this is unworkable, and this is suffering, and it's not necessary. It is possible not to suffer. So that's what the message is, and the practice of meditation is a way to begin a process that can bring you to freedom. If you make the commitment. And it does take a commitment, because the practice of meditation itself is a very challenging practice. Your mind will do everything in its power to stop that process, because if that process continues, the mind's out of business. And it has to participate in the house you own instead of you living in a room in that house of the mind.